Hello and welcome to all of you. You're watching Tech24. I'm Julia Seeger. As we celebrate the third anniversary of the adoption and enforcement of the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, we're going to take a look back at how much this law has raised expectations in terms of data privacy and cybersecurity, but also why authorities elsewhere have decided to follow suit, like the state of California. And whether you're a music lover, a beginner, an amateur pianist, or a professional, you're going to want to tune in to Test24 as we try Steinway's Spirio. It's one of the world's finest high-resolution player piano that is capable of live performance capture and playback. Now, the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, is Europe's data privacy and security law. It took effect in May 2018 and is the toughest data regulation in the world. Although it was drafted and passed by the EU, it imposes obligations onto any organization that offers goods or services to EU citizens, and hence collects their data, even if that company is based outside of the EU. With this bill, Europe wanted to protect users first, and this is why on every website, like France 24's, you're asked to accept terms and conditions first. Ellen Gainsford has more.
Do you know why numerous websites ask you to accept or decline receiving cookies? European regulation has changed, and your agreement to cookies and other connection tracking is now needed. This allows you to access to more information and control the use of your data. But in practice, what does it mean? When you click on the France 24 website before you can access the content, a window appears that asks you to make a choice about the data settings. You can accept or decline these options, depending on their purpose, whether they are audience tracking or personalization, and by which platforms, video or social media. But what are the consequences of this choice? When you click on Accept All, you authorize our partners and us to use your data to optimize your experience. You will get full access to the France 24 website, and our content will evolve and adapt according to your needs. When you click on Decline All, we and our partners won't have the information necessary to offer an optimal experience. Some actions won't be possible anymore. For example, you won't be able to read the tweets in the articles, and the advertising will be less relevant to you. When you click on Parameters, you can decide for what reason we are able or not to access your data. Your experience on France 24's websites will be adapted to your choices and personalized to your wishes. For example, you can give consent to be counted as a visitor to the site, while also refusing targeted advertising. Your choices are changeable at any time when you click on Preferences in our menu.
Now, technology editor Peter O'Brien is here to join the data protection party, and I'm not kidding, you actually bought balloons.
Yep, here they are. It's 3 years.
And we're ready to jam out. Now, GDPR may only have 3 years, is only 3 years old, of course, but many countries around the world are now taking example on this new legislation. What are some examples?
So just a few examples: Australia, Japan, Thailand, Chile, South Africa as well, all getting on board inspired by the GDPR and looking for ways to make organizations respect consent over data or face fines. So one of the most recent is in Brazil, which in September, its Data Protection Act came into law. And it's very similar to the GDPR, except the penalties for non-compliance are a little lighter. The same can't be said for China and India, who have recently made proposals for their own similar things to GDPR. These will, though, have very hefty fines for non-compliance. On the other hand, they're giving more discretion to their own governments to decide when and where to actually enforce these rules. Over in the US, there have been lots of proposals on a state and a federal level. Perhaps the most famous is in California, perhaps the strictest as well, the California Consumer Privacy Act. It doesn't, though, go as far as in the EU because consumers have to opt out of the sale of their data, whereas under the GDPR, you have to opt in before a company can then sell your data.
So clearly momentum is building since the GDPR got the ball rolling, but there are some people who are criticizing it, and there's still a lot of work to be done as well.
But I know just because it's the first doesn't mean it's going to end up being the best by any means. I'm not saying it's the best thing since sliced bread. It's had a lot of criticism. Notably, people are saying that it's actually giving big tech more of a hand up because they can afford to find loopholes in the legislation, unlike smaller companies for whom compliance is very costly. The biggest issue for me, though, is this idea of legitimate interest. It's this provision, you'll come across this phrase, if you go on a website, you see the cookie banner that will come up, you'll see legitimate interest. And this basically means that a company can take your data and use it anyway, even if you haven't given your consent, if they can justify that they absolutely need it to provide their service.
Now, you just mentioned those banners, those annoying banners. Will we ever see an end to them?
Well, there is new EU regulation, which it looks like it's finally going to be coming into effect fairly soon. It's on e-privacy, and it will mean fewer cookie walls and banners of this kind, because it should allow companies and organizations to not require consent to use your data if they use it anonymously, so with no link back to your personal self. However, this is controversial because some people don't want their data being processed at all, whether it's anonymous or not, and they don't trust companies to use it in an anonymous way. On the other hand, though, there will be no more legitimate interest loopholes for data on private communications. So things like emails, messages, we might finally see the end to companies snooping into our private DMs. But laws, of course, can only go so far. That's why we're seeing lots of grassroots organizations come together and advocate for things like a Hippocratic oath for data scientists, a set of ethical guidelines to follow, whether or not you're using people's data.
Well, thank you very much for that, Peter O'Brien there. Now, when it comes to data protection, our next guest knows exactly what she's talking about. Brittany Kaiser is the former business development director for Cambridge Analytica, and in 2016, she became a whistleblower and helped unveil details of the misuse of Facebook data, since she's launched her own foundation to help raise awareness on data privacy. Well, let's cross over to Brittany, who's in Austin, Texas. Hello, Brittany, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Europe is clearly now the new regulatory icon to follow. The Biden administration has also appointed people who seem ready to tackle tech giants. Are we going in the right direction here in terms of data privacy?
I think we are going in the right direction, but it has been nearly 3 years exactly since the GDPR was passed. It's so incredibly important that under this administration that the United States can prove that we can get through federal legislation. Since the passing of CPRA, which was the update to CCPA this past November, we have seen just a little bit of movement by the states in the US to take their own privacy seriously. We've seen a bill in Virginia. We just got a bill number for the New York Privacy Act, which I helped with in the state of New York. So let's see if the states can start to force some national movement.
Now, are GDPR and other pieces of legislation enough to prevent tech giants from weaponizing our data? And what should we do more, or perhaps differently? We've actually touched up on it a little earlier in the show. Some are arguing that GDPR is hurting small businesses, while big companies are simply finding loopholes.
I definitely think that legislation and regulation is never enough, especially when it's difficult to actually reach compliance. That's one of the more important parts of CPRA passed this last November in the state of California, which for the first time not only creates a data protection commission in the United States, but also provides government funds to help small and medium-sized businesses with compliance and actually making sure that their data backend gets in the state that it needs to be. But on top of legislation and regulation, we need to make sure that people are educated and aware of how technology works, so that they can make decisions for themselves about how to remain safe, but also be successful in their digital life. Alongside this, we have new emerging technologies that are much more privacy by design and can help people make better decisions about how to remain safe online.
Now, how can we take back control over our data and become active data citizens?
One of the most important ways to take control of our data is first to be aware of how the technology works that we're using. Where is our data going? Who is getting a hold of it? And then start to be using privacy by design technologies where we know that we can protect our data. We know it's only going somewhere if we have explicitly consented to it. And hopefully, especially with the help of emerging technologies like blockchain and advanced forms of encryption, we can make sure that we actually get paid for our data and share it safely, securely, and anonymously.
Well, Brittany Kaiser, the founder of Own Your Data, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on Tech 24.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we're going to move on now to Test 24. Now, Peter, it's been hard to ignore this beauty right behind me. It's actually a brand new Steinway & Sons grand piano. And it's not just any piano. It looks like a traditional one, but it's actually connected to your iPad.
That's right. Yeah, it has stereo technology in it. And it's kind of a modern day interpretation of those old pneumatic pianolas that date back to the 19th century. So with the internet and with electronics, you can make this thing play whatever you want. So for instance, if I want to hear Lang Lang play some Chopin as if he's actually here, all I have to do is connect it to the iPad and press play.
And very realistic. It's almost spooky how much it's realistic. It feels like Lang Lang is here in the studio.
Yeah, and it's not just the exact notes he's playing, but the exact speed at which he's hitting the notes as well. It doesn't just have modern performance on it either. It also has, Steinway has also taken recordings of lots of old artists that are no longer with us and worked out the exact notes and the exact velocity at which they're hitting the notes. So you've got thousands of recordings to listen to. Not only that, you can make your own recordings and play those back as well. So I had a go at that feature earlier. Of course, my piano playing isn't quite at the same level as Lang Lang's, as you can hear.
Yeah, you still have work on that.
Yeah, I still have a bit of work to do, but the way it works is quite interesting. So it has a rack of something called solenoids underneath it, and these are basically electromagnetic springs, coils under each note, and they each have a piston in it. So these are connected, obviously, and you can make it play the exact note and the exact at the exact strength you want it. Not just Steinway are doing this. Yamaha has a thing called a Disclavier, which does a similar thing. And what's quite cool with that is you can live stream piano performances from anywhere in the world onto your piano at home.
I have to say, this is quite mind-blowing. Thank you very much, Peter, for that. It brings us to the end of this week's edition of Tech 24. We're going to leave you with this beautiful music. Have a great day.